They got the NWA World Heavyweight Championship on the line. Ric Flair defending against Sting. Sting's first big match. And this is wild. And by the way, I can't remember when it was, but within a few months, I think beforehand, Flair and Wyndham had actually drawn 16,000 people to Greensboro for the world title match. $130-something thousand house. Sting had never had a big main event match like this. That's why they didn't want to give away Flair and Wyndham or Flair and Luger. So for the main event, they said, well, let's give Sting a shot at the title, but it's not giving away a big marquee match. What it did was make Sting's career, because Flair loved the guy. As far as his athleticism, his look, his personality, the way the people were starting to get with him, he wanted to make him. So he was all on board with this. And this ended up being not only the match of the year that year with all the voting and everything, but also the most important match probably that TBS broadcast in their early years of wrestling involvement, because it's what made Sting really a star on the level with Wyndham and Luger and Flair and the Horsemen and all those guys. He wasn't then. People don't remember that now because they aren't old enough to have been fans before Sting was a big star. So they've got this match, but to acquiesce to showbiz involvement, to TBS, to the new TV partner, whatever, they've got to shoehorn the celebrities in some kind of way. And they always intended to have a Broadway on this. They didn't want to beat Sting, but at the same time, they didn't want to fucking, do anything screwy. So they always thought they'd go Broadway. So they decided to have judges. The judges were Baltimore promoter Gary Juster, my old friend Gutless Gary, who he wasn't like the promoter on television. They just announced he was the Baltimore promoter, so he sounded like he knew what he was doing. Wrestling legend Sandy Scott, who everybody in the Carolinas knew and nobody else, knew anymore because he'd been retired for 20 fucking years. Penthouse pet Patty Mullen.
Yeah.
And Flair got to do the promo saying, well, I know who she's going to be voting for.
He was right.
And then here's the problem. They also announced Ken Osmond / Eddie Haskell. And for whatever reason, I don't know whether that's when Jason Hervey had just started. No, he wasn't fucking Missy yet. He wasn't even of age yet.
No, and Missy wasn't even there.
Missy wasn't even there. It was Owen. Missy wasn't even there. But Jason Hervey, he was on the Wonder Years at that point. And an actor, and he shows up and he's hanging around. That's how he's a wrestling fan, but he's a TV star, so they put him on, and that's how he met Missy and ended up fucking around with Missy, was being at all these wrestling shows. But they announced them at ringside too, even though they weren't judges, and they sat at the judges' table. So there's 5 judges, but only 3 of them got a vote. I think I'd have rather had Eddie Haskell's word over the Penthouse Pet.
Do you remember what movie she starred in? What classic?
I do not.
It used to be on TV all the time. I don't think it'll be on any TV network anytime soon. She was the star of the classic Frankenhooker. Do you remember Frankenhooker?
I remember that now, Frankenhooker. They put a hooker together from parts, right?
Yeah, well, the guy, he concocts like this form of crack cocaine where if you smoke it, you explode. And he gets a whole bunch of hookers back to his hotel room because his girlfriend had died, but he has her head, and he needs to reconstruct her, and then he decides he doesn't want to do it, he can't do this, but the hookers find the drugs, and they start smoking it, like they're Jake the Snake Roberts, and they all just blow up, and then he has the parts to put Frankenhooker, who is played by Patty Mullen, together. I wonder if she's like the other pets. The Penthouse Pets were all escorts.
Get your mind out of the gutter.
No, it's a fact. They were.
I do not like, I'm a prude. I do not like sex talk. Intimate relations should be between one man and one woman. With as small a crowd as possible watching.
I think what I said fit into those guidelines.
Anyway,
Frankenhooker,
now on DVD. So... And J.J. Dillon, by the way, Flair's manager, was hung in a small cage over the Dusty loved gimmick and everything. But once again, once the bell rings, this was the only long match, so they could take their time. Sting was still huge, but he was so athletic, and this stood out as a match for the world title. You got the impression it was important, even with all the goofy judges and everything, the way that the referee and the guys in the ring treated it, the way that the announcers spoke about it. It's an athletic contest for something that's important. And the people in the building, they were blowing when Sting would reverse Flair's top wrist lock. And this was the bones of an old-fashioned NWA World Championship match with a modern 80s Flair spin on it. It was paced and built slow from the start so it could continue to unfold and lead to making the challenger look like a star. The spots built and paid off, but then Rick would slow it back down because he knew that they had time to fucking put in. I mentioned it here, this is where I had noted that the announcing, Tony Schiavone had so much more energy and seemed so much more genuine. He didn't sound like he was either just shaking his head like, what the fuck am I looking at, or how can I call this? It's not that he's trying to make fun of anything even now, but he just doesn't know what he's looking at.
Can I say, though, I think...
Yeah.
Because I like their work in the future, I personally would have preferred Jim Ross and Bob Caudle doing the match. I thought Bob Caudle added a lot.
They were folksy. With each other. Yeah, well, I just had a three-man booth. JR and Tony had been fine. JR and Bob worked really well smoothed together. I think there was always there was a little tension between JR and Tony because they were both at one time. Tony was the lead guy till JR showed up, and then JR was the lead guy, but Tony was the second guy. Bob didn't care. Not that he didn't care. He always worked hard, but he didn't care whether he was the lead dog or the last dog, as long as, he was just there to do what he was supposed to do. But all through this, Sting was green and he wasn't smooth, but he did everything that Flair called. Even if it wasn't pretty, I guarantee you Ric Flair never called Sting to do another flying head scissors after they almost got killed with this one, because nobody does the old flying head scissors like it used to be done by the baby faces, the sideways and up, and the old Ricky Gibson. They all do the Hurricane Ranas now, and I don't know what fuck Sting thought that it was supposed to look like. But anyway, I like the idea. They announced the standby matches because they got 45 minutes left of television broadcast time. People know that. So if this match ends early, we've got standby matches. I think Sting and Flair still have the most photogenic press slam ever. It just looked great when they did it. But if you go back and look at this match, they kept the people's fucking attention. It was ebbing and flowing. Flair was getting weaker and Sting was getting stronger. It was 20 minutes in almost before they went to the floor. And then there was a little dust up out there, and then fucking Flair ran Sting into the railing and then left him, and they beat the count back in and left Sting to get a breather. Now everybody's trying to do the most dangerous shit possible on the floor and risk dangerous injury. Before it was to go out and get a little breather on the floor. Flair then really kicks in the heat. He's aggressive. He's vicious. He's standing over him and gripping him in the face, imposing his will. Tommy Young, best referee ever, would add to the heel's heat by looking like he was really trying to referee and stop some cheating, which meant it wasn't his fault because he was just a limp dick in the ring. It was the heel's fault because he was really overbearing this referee. He was trying his best. They go back out on the floor, but it looks vicious and serious, not stupid and staged. And as I mentioned, less dangerous than what they were doing in the ring. That's the idea. When you go out on the floor, you can take a pissy bump because it's concrete. And people go, oh shit, that's concrete. Anyway, at this point during the heat, Flair beat Sting to death, but didn't hit him with shit that nobody could survive. Just one big move over and over. He was gut shotting him. He was hitting him across the back. He was chopping him. He was roughing him up. You got sympathy for Sting being beat the fuck out of, but at the same time, it wasn't ludicrous. Just move, kick out, kick out, kick out. So when Sting finally does sting up and starts coming back on Flair, they were fucking popping. But then Sting flies into the fucking post and Flair goes right back to the heat. Every time almost that Sting would blow a false comeback, as soon as he'd start blowing the false comeback, Flair would take a few bumps and then Flair wouldn't stop him, but he would have Sting stop himself, fly into the post, fly over the top as Flair ducks, whatever. It's a very subtle thing, but it's all about making the challenger get closer and closer as the match goes on. 30 minutes in, Flair starts working the leg. Now the Greensboro crowd instantly knows, well, he's going to try for the figure four because people were educated by repetition over and over of these things happening. So they knew what was going on. That helped. You don't tease you're going to fucking work a guy's leg when you've never worked a guy's leg before on this promotion's television, but suddenly you're, oh shit, he's working the leg. Finally, Flair gets the figure four, and he works on it for a long time. And finally, then when Sting is trying to come back, suddenly he called that spot. He told me one time, he said, I just looked at him, I said, fuck it, beat your chest. And Sting starts beating the chest while he's in the figure four, and Flair has that shit look on his face, and Sting turns the figure four over, and the place goes legitimately mental. And the only reason they didn't stay mental even longer was because once Sting turned it over, since he'd never done that before, he didn't know how to work it. So they just laid there. And Flair tells Tommy Young, untie me, get me out of here. But a hold brought the house down. Then Flair goes back to the heat. He's calling a roller coaster. It's not going to be that easy for this kid. But at this point, he can't stay on top of Sting for 30 seconds or 45 seconds before Sting starts fighting back. Sting's getting stronger. Flair's getting weaker. Sting gets the figure four. They fucking love it. Flair's selling off the charts for this thing, screaming and paying. Oh, God, he's screaming, sweat's flying. And by the last few minutes of the match, Flair's desperate. Sting's kicking his ass all over ringside. Sting's invincible. Flair's bleeding slightly. They never called the blood again. Sting goes for that Stinger Splash, and I don't think he meant to. I'm pretty sure he didn't mean to, but he went so high, he just went all the way over the fucking top when Flair moved. And that looked good. But now they're down to 3 minutes, and they're going back. And in the last 3 minutes, they did 3 big false finishes that they built to, and it made sense, and they registered afterwards. And then Flair, by that point, the last minute, he's just telling Sting, don't sell anything. He's kicking him. He's punching him. Sting's bowing up. And finally, 30 seconds left. Sting hits the Stinger Splash and puts the Scorpion on him. Can Flair hang on? 25 seconds. Oh, my God. The people are screaming, can he do it? Can he do it? They knew by that point he wasn't going to do it, but they were just loving it. And the time expires with Sting with the submission hold on the world champion. But ding, ding, ding. Sting is up in the corner and Flair's face down in the middle of the ring, and we've just made a new babyface superstar. Bell to bell, that was as good as Sting could be at that point in his life. And they go to break and they come back for the judging, and it all falls to shit again because obviously the Penthouse Pet votes for Ric Flair. Gary Jester votes for Sting because he's got to go back to the people in Baltimore. And Sandy Scott, because he was a grumpy old fucker and he didn't care about taking the heat, he called it the draw and the people booed. And there was no vote for Jason Hervey or Eddie Haskell, even though people were standing around going, well, what do you got to say? Horrible stipulation with the judges, horrible execution of the judging, but one of the most famous wrestling matches in the history of television.
A star-making performance.
And there's nobody that can do these things anymore. There's no fans that can watch them because now that they've seen this other shit, you can't look at it the same way, and there's no wrestlers that can perpetrate it.
Well, that's what I'm thinking too, to our earlier discussion about Luger and how good he got in 88, 89, 90. Just a few years into the business, same thing with Sting. They started probably right around the same time. Sting was wrestling 1985.
Yeah, well, I remember we just told a story here on one of these shows lately where I saw Sting and Warrior together in Louisville at Christmas of 85. And Sting, The only reason Sting wasn't the worst wrestler I'd ever seen is because he was standing next to the Ultimate Warrior. And 2 years and 4 months later, he goes 45 minutes on national television in the highest rated cable wrestling match of all time against the best worker in the business and carries his end of it.
And it says something about the talent in the wrestling business and Bill Watts' UWF and Jim Crockett Promotions in this period of time, that you could take a guy that initially is just a big steroid guy, can't move, can't do too much, but he's in there with the right people. He's in there with Ted DiBiase. He's in there with Ric Flair here. And obviously he has the aptitude to learn or do something different. I mean, Ultimate Warrior went a completely different direction.
Well, and that's one thing you said, well, take a big steroid guy. I'm sure Sting had probably taken some supplements, and I'm not indicting him for that. He was a bodybuilder in those days, but Sting was never just a big steroid guy.
When he first started and he was teaming with the Ultimate Warrior, he was much bigger then.
And he was bigger then, but he was always an athlete. The athletic part of him was hidden because of the extra weight. The Ultimate Warrior was never an athlete. He was not coordinated. He was not athletic. He had no cardio. He never did anything in a wrestling ring that would cause anybody who knows what they're talking about to say he was an athlete. Sting was a fucking athlete. Warrior got even bigger and more clownish looking and more incoherent to go work for Vince, and Sting studied from the guys he was in the ring with, dropped weight so that he could move, and those leapfrogs and drop kicks and stinger splashes. And so he may have played the part of a big steroid guy at one time, but there was more to Sting than that. That's all Ultimate Warrior ever was.
Right, and I wasn't saying that as an indictment of Sting.
I know, but I'm just saying, you take the big steroid guy. Well, he did a lot for himself there, but he was just so much more athletic, and at that size and that build that he had here to be able to do those athletic things was amazing.
Well, here's the other thing to think about. I don't know how many guys today could start and within 2.5 years, 3 years, be ready for a main event roster spot and not blow it. But Luger and Sting, unless I'm wrong, they weren't even wrestling fans. They were recruited into the business based on look, and they figured it out because of who they were working with. It really is remarkable when you think about it. The Road Warriors too, even though that's a little different. These guys that weren't wrestling fans, like so many guys, today everyone who's a wrestler grew up a wrestling fan, pretty much. Not everyone, but you know what I mean. Back then, there were guys who had no interest in wrestling and got into it because they needed a job. And they figured out how to make it work. It really is astounding.
Yeah. Well, and back then, to be honest, we looked down at those guys that were never fans of the business because they didn't know how that it was supposed to look, and you had to lead them and explain it to them, and the learning curve was harder. But now, the guys that get in the business that have been wrestling fans, they're the ones with all the bad habits that it's too late to break. They don't know what this shit's supposed to look like. They know what it looks like now. So if you get somebody that really has not been a wrestling fan and is a great athlete, you could actually train them and have a better chance of coming out with an accomplished pro wrestler than with these fucking guys that are watching what they think wrestling is supposed to be, because you can't break those bad habits. Anyway, that's basically the situation that launched Sting's full-time main event spot level Major League Wrestling career there. And, it would end up being, Flair, Sting, and Luger until the mid-90s would be synonymous with the top guys in the company. But it was all back to this match on that particular TV special.